Hello and welcome. Today I want to walk you through the steps of configuring a custom SSL certificate for WSO2 API Manager. So the setup I'm going to consider today is very simple. So I am going to create one virtual machine in my computer, and then I'm going to download and install the JDK and then API Manager. And then we are going to assign a custom domain name api.dev.corp.com, and then we are going to create an SSL certificate for this custom domain name and configure that SSL cert for API Manager. You can of course you can use any virtualization technology to create the virtual machine, but today I'm going to use Ubuntu Multipass. You can download and then you can install it on any operating system that you are using. Right, we'll switch to a terminal window and then get started. So first step would be to create the virtual machine. So I would say multipass launch, and then I can give a name, say I'll say API dev, and then of course we can give some parameters to configure the virtual machine to assign a specific amount of memory and CPU cores. So by default Ubuntu Multipass creates virtual machines with 1 GB of RAM and 1 CPU core, but we are going to bump that up to 4 GB of RAM, 4 GB of RAM, and then assign 2 CPU cores. Of course, first time when you run this command, if you have not done that already, it is going to download the default or the latest Ubuntu LTS image from Ubuntu servers and then create the virtual machine. I've done that step once, so you don't see the download step here. And now our virtual machine is ready. We can say multipass ls to list our virtual machines. Of course, it assigns an IP address, and you can also see that state is running. The next step would be I would like to get into this virtual machine and then download the JDK and the WSO2 API Manager. I've already downloaded API Manager and JDK for my in my host machine, so I'm going to copy over that files to the virtual machines. So in order to do that, I'm going to mount my host machine folder into my virtual machine. So I can say multipass mount. My files are in my downloads folder, downloads, and then I want to mount it to my virtual machine API dev, and then I have to give the full URL of the folder or the path. So I'll say home Ubuntu files. So by default, when you launch a multipass instance, it creates this home directory called home Ubuntu, and you are inside that directory. So anytime when we get into a virtual machine, you will be using this home folder. So we'll say we want to mount it to a new folder called files there, and it is going to mount my host downloads folder into the virtual machine. It will take a second to mount this, and then we will get into the virtual machine by using multipass shell, and then give our virtual machine name, and then now we are in a shell inside the virtual machine. So if we do ls on the files folder, we can see the files that we have in our host machine. So I'm going to copy over the JDK first, files open JDK into my current folder, and also I'm going to copy over files WSO2 API Manager zip file to my current folder as well. Then let's unzip open JDK and then unzip WSO2 API Manager. So by default it doesn't have unzip command, so we'll use sudo apt-get install unzip to install unzip command, and then unzip the folder. As you can see, it unzipped, and if this is the first time you are seeing WSO2 API Manager, there's no lengthy installation steps as such. You just unzip and then start playing around with the server. Before doing that, let's first set the JDK path, Java home path. So it should be, our path should be inside JDK. So my current directory should be this one that I just copied. So I'm gonna edit my bash rc and then say export Java home is home, the path we just copied, and then I'm gonna also set the executables into my current path. So export path Java home bin, and then the rest of the path variable here, and then I'm gonna save and quit, and then source it to my current running instance of the shell. And then I can test saying Java version to see whether I have Java in my path, and of course I have Java in my path. And then I can go to the WSO2 API Manager folder, and then we are going to create a new SSL certificate. So for this one, let's switch to the browser and then look at the documentation of WSO2 API Manager. So you can go access the documentation by going to going to resources and then documentation, which will going to give you the landing page of the documentation catalog. So what we want here is API Manager. So we'll go to the latest version 4.0.0, and then what we want is creating a new keystore. So let's search for keystore and see what we get. And here, this is what we want: create new keystores. So let's go ahead and see what are the options here. So first one, it says creating a keystore using an existing certificate, and it's a existing CA-signed certificate, which is not what we want. We want to create a new self-signed certificate with a new keystore, and this option is what we want. So let's it says my keystore signed repository resources security. Go to that folder first and then generate the keystore. So let's copy this command and head over to the terminal, and then let's go to WS repository resources security, and if we look under the folder, you can see the keystores and the trust over here. So before doing the command here, let me go to a shell and try to format this in a bit more nicer manner. So we can see we are using the gen key to generate a new keystore, and we are providing an alias of new cert and key algorithm and key size and the keystore name. And then we have the most important part that we want for this scenario, where we want to give this custom domain name, and then organization unit and organization name, and the location, etc. And store pass and key pass I'm gonna keep the same. So I'm gonna change here the domain name. What we want is dev.api.corp.com, and organization unit we're gonna skip, and then organization I'm just gonna say corp, and then get rid of all the location details. We are not interested in that for this. And let me copy this and then go back to where we were, and then paste this to create the new keystore. And if we look at the directory, now we can see our new keystore is created. So let's hop on to the browser to see what's the next step in the documentation. And it should be where we want to import, export, first of all export the public certificate and then import it to the client trust store. Adding a CSIN certificate. Let me scroll down. Importing certificates to the keystore is what we want, and we want it for the keystore that we created. And these are the two commands that we are going to execute now. So I'm going to copy this and then head over to the terminal and then paste it here, and then just going to change the file. I'm going to say cert.pem, and keystore name is new keystore.jks, and cert alias is new cert, the one we just created. And the keystore password is here is my password that we just gave. I'm going to say my password, and then it exports the public certificates to cert.pem. And now let's head back to the browser, copy the other command to import this to the client trust store. So store password, this store password is for the client trust store, which is WSO2 Carbon. And we're going to change the cert file name cert.pem, and cert alias is new cert. Trust is certificate. Yes, we want to trust is certificate, and now the certificate is imported into the client trust store. And then we can head over to a repository folder, and we are going to change the domain name that's associated with the product before we start. And of course the keystore, the new keystore that we created just now. So let's open up conf deployment.toml file, and this is where all the server configuration for WSO2 API Manager is recorded at. So hostname, we're going to change it to dev.api.corp.com, and then we're going to scroll down for this keystore section. So we have 3 different keystores that we have to configure: TLS cert, primary keystore, and the internal cert. So I'm going to change the first one here. Our keystore name is new keystore.jks. Type JK is fine. Password is my password, and alias is new cert, and again key password is my password. And then I'm going to copy this 2 times. So copy it and 2 times, and then I'm going to change the second one to keystore.primary, and third one to keystore.internal, and then save this file. So there's another configuration that we have to make before we start the server, and that is our API Manager gateway environment URL. So this environment URL you can see in the developer portal when an API is exposed, the URL that you see. So we're going to change this from localhost to dev.api.corp.com, and then of course HTTPS point is again dev.api.corp.com. And then we also want to change the publisher URL, default publisher URL. So let's scroll down. Sorry, not the publisher, but the developer portal URL. Scroll down here. There should be a section for developer portal, which is right here. So I'm going to uncomment this one, these 2 first entries, and then change this URL to dev.api.corp.com, and then save the file. So now all the configurations are complete. Now we can go ahead and start. And of course, as you saw in the deployment.toml file, we hard coded some domain names here. So usually in a production environment, you don't have to hard code. You typically use a deployment automation tool that will parameterize all these entries into a central sort of variables, like a key value pair that you configure once, and then you do a config overlay to match that in the configuration file. So now let's go to our root directory of API Manager, and then if you look at the bin folder, there are a bunch of scripts. So the script that they are to start the server is API Manager.sh file, and that's what we're going to do now. So let's start this bin./bin API Manager.sh, which is going to start API Manager, and it's going to take a couple of seconds to start here. So while this is starting, one couple of cool things about Ubuntu multipass or canonical multipass is that it gives a lot of stuff out of the box, like assigning dedicated IP addresses, which sort of persist over reboot, it seems. So far, from the brief tests I've done, it seems to persist through reboots, which is nice. And then, of course, you can mount host files to the guest without going through hoops like other virtualization technologies. So it's going to start up here. And then, of course, before accessing this, we need to change the URL to be able to resolvable. So for that, let's find out the IP address here. You can find out by doing multipass ls, which is 10.232.22.107. So now in my host machine, I'm gonna edit my hosts file. Sudo vi etc hosts, and then I'm gonna add an entry for this IP address and say it's gonna resolve to dev.api.corp.com. And then let's check on our instance. Looks like I accidentally shut down the server. Let's start the server again. So bin WSO2 API Manager.sh. Waiting for it to start. Event junction consumer. All right, looks like it's up again. So let's hop onto the browser and then try to access and test our newly created SSL certificate is configured. So let's go to https dev.api.corp.com, and by default the HTTPS port, since we didn't change anything, it's going to be 9443. And your connection is not private. This is, of course, because we are using self-signed certificate and the browser doesn't know about that. Proceed here. And now we are in the sign-in page. And we can examine our HTTPS certificate. Says certificate. And you can see the newly created certificates is there, dev.api.corp.com. And then we log in with the default admin username, admin password, admin credentials to the publisher, and then publish a test API, and then see whether it's working properly. So let's deploy a sample API. Just going to deploy a sample API, and it's now published. Let's click on View in the portal, which is going to open up a developer portal, and then let's try this out. And you can also see the URL is correct here. It correctly says dev.api.corp.com 8243. Here it's the port is different because this API at runtime is exposed through a different transport to the 943 here, which is exposing the developer portal. So we can say try it out, try out, get a test key. It'll generate a test key automatically for us, and then click on get menu, and then click on try it out, execute. And now we can see the response of this payload, response of this call. We can see the sample JSON payload in the browser, and the endpoints again are correctly reflected. The newly created domain name that we just added. So that's about it for creating a new SSL certificate. So thanks for watching. See you on the next one.